Hi, everybody. Hi,
Thank you
Elizabeth.
all so much. Grateful for everyone joining. We'll,
Here's,
we'll, we'll give
okay.
everyone a minute to trickle in, and then we'll begin because there's so much to learn tonight. So much to learn.
And let me just say, I'm grateful for folks sharing their presence with us. I had to teach law school during COVID, and so it is a gift, and I'm grateful for it. Hi, Mikey. Welcome. Hi, Guptan.
Michelle, thanks for chiming in. We're excited about this as well.
Hi, Sarah. Oh, I'm muted. No, I'm not muted.
Well, it is 8:02. So what I might do is I might just get started with some introductions here, and then we'll get to hear from Alvaro shortly. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Dr. Krish Subrahmanian. I'm a former special education teacher turned pediatrician, and I now work at HCMC. And I'm a candidate for Minnesota State Senate in District 49. I want to welcome you tonight to this, what I think is a really important conversation with Alvaro Bedoya. And it's on the topic of corporate power versus people power. This event really matters to us, to this campaign, for a couple of reasons. It represents some core values. The first is learning together. Uh, I'm a pediatrician, and our patients can't vote. And so it falls to pediatricians and to teachers and to people who care about young people to advocate on their behalf. And so when I moved to Minnesota 11 years ago, I got involved with an organization called Elders for Infants and the Prenatal to 3 Policy Forum. And for a few years, we just learned. We learned about what are the issues that are crucial for a policymaker to know if they're going to make policy about kids. And for a few years, all we did was learn and talk and break bread and bring people together to have discussions. And then, all of a sudden, the legislature flipped and we had an opportunity to pass all sorts of great things for young people. This is why learning together matters. It may not always look fancy and it may not look dramatic, but it lays the foundation for real change. And the second value that I'm really excited about tonight is building coalition, building coalitions around the state. It's so crucial if we're going to pass an agenda that makes the lives of Minnesotans, of working Minnesotans better. Whether you live in Eden Prairie, whether you live in New Prague or anywhere else in Minnesota, we need people to see that this is not simply a left-right divide anymore. This is about our policy and politics being shaped by oligarchs, by concentrated corporate interests, or by people. And that's why it's so exciting to have everyone come together tonight. And I'm so excited to introduce my friend, my mentor, my colleague, Mark Legvold, running for Senate District 58. Mark comes from a family of educators. He's an educator himself. He's a farmer who brings real lived experience to public service. If you look at his website, it's interesting to me. He puts one line, a half line in there about being the senior enlisted member of his unit in the military. But that line hardly captures what Chief Master Sergeant Legvold meant to our unit and means to me personally. When anyone in the unit needed something, when we needed leadership, when we needed guidance, when we needed steadiness, and when we needed the right answer, more than 1,000 airmen turned to Mark Legvold. You can't buy that kind of leadership. You can't manufacture it. It's earned through hard work, through service, and through experience under pressure. I can't imagine a better leader for our state, and so it's my honor to introduce Mark Legvold.
Thanks, Krish. And I tell you what, next time I have to do a stump speech, I'm just going to bring you with and let you talk. That is so flattering. I'm touched and I'm honored to even be considered as a mentor by you. Like Krish said, my name's Mark Legvold. I'm running for Minnesota State Senate in District 58, a completely different district than what Krish is running in. It's rural. It's also kind of suburban. We've got two world-class colleges. We've got fantastic small towns. And then we just go right up to the suburban side of the Twin Cities and all the way out to the Mississippi River and touch it on both sides. So a completely different economic infrastructure. But one thing that ties it all together, Krish alluded to, and that is the fact that people need protection right now. And as a fellow airman, Krish and I were colleagues. Um, our primary job was to protect freedoms. We showed up, put our uniform every day on every day. And Chris still wears the uniform of the United States Air Force and just recently came back from a deployment. And those deployments, those times that we spend together in uniform, it is about protecting people. And that's why coming together and learning with one another so that we can be better educated as candidates and better educated as a populace is so important because it does come down to the more informed we are, the more protected we are. But there are a lot of people out there that just need protection from folks that understand and that are working for the best impact that they can, whether it's for their patients, whether it's for the country or the people here in the state. And we protected people on so many different realms. We protected people's freedoms, both here in the United States and abroad in countries that needed it. Um, Chris works hard every single day to protect children, to make sure that they can thrive and be healthy in the world. Um, but most importantly, politically, why we're running for office, it's to protect people that um, need protection from forces that endanger them, whether they're workers, whether they're consumers, whether they're just working in their community and want a safe and healthy place to live. And that's why I think it's so important that we come together today, learn from Alvaro about what he has done to protect us as people, as consumers, and as workers. And so I'm just thrilled to be able to co-host with such a good friend and a mentor to me. So thanks, Krish, for the opportunity to co-host with you.
Thanks so much, Mark. And now I get the honor of introducing someone else who brings that same spirit that Mark does, the spirit of service, and he does it at the national stage. I met Alvaro Bedoya at and I don't know if he remembers this. I met him at an audition.
I remember exactly when I met you. So let's see if it's the same thing.
That may seem it's the
Okay,
same
go
story,
ahead.
but I met him at
Okay.
an audition for an a cappella group in
Oh
college,
no. No,
and
no,
it
we met
was
before that. We met. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but
Tell your
it
story.
was immediately clear to me that he was a much better musician than I was, a much
Uh,
better singer than I was. But what has stayed with me from that moment and what's carried through for 25 years of friendship is something else. There was no one who listened better, no one kinder, no one more thoughtful than Alvaro. And these are awesome, remarkable personal qualities. But over the past 2 decades, I've gotten to watch that same kind, thoughtful friend become a powerful force for protecting rights, for
Thank you.
advancing justice, and for standing up for what is good in the world. And he's done it the hard way. He's done it by becoming a true expert on issues that shape our lives. He's one of the world's experts on corporate power and privacy. Alvaro was the founding director at the Center for Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law Center, where he helped lead some of the most important conversations in the country on how technology interacts with our rights. He was nominated by President Joe Biden
Thank,
to serve as a
okay.
commissioner on the Federal
Thank you.
Trade Commission, where he took on some of the most powerful corporate interests in the world. And he served in that role with integrity and courage until he was fired by President Trump. Now, whether a president can legally do that is, like many things we're seeing right now, still very much a question, an open question. But I'll say this: if you're going to get fired in public service, being fired for standing up to corporate power, standing up for people, that's not a mark against you. It's a badge of honor. And I've known Alvaro for a long time. I've seen the way he shows up for people quietly, consistently, with conviction. And it's the same person who listened so deeply to me many times through our friendship. and has spent his whole career listening to people. And I can't think of a better voice for a moment like this. So I'd just like to please join me in
Honor.
welcoming Alvaro
Thank
Bedoya.
you. Thank you. Thank you. And Krish, I want to meet that guy you're talking about. He sounds awesome. I appreciate it. The warm welcome, Krish, Mark. I am in awe of what all of you are doing, what both of you are doing, the service you provided to your country, the service you're providing now. You being a teacher, Mark, Krish, you being a pediatrician. I've known Krish since 1999, and what I want to tell all of you about Krish is that Krish could have been making his billions. He could be one of the wealthiest people you know. He could be off in the Silicon Valley or wherever else, but he chose to become a special ed teacher. He chose to become a pediatrician, and he chose to enter military service where he served with Mark. And so I feel lucky to be associated with them. Let me quickly tell you about the work I did at FTC. But first, I have to say, I am also a Minnesota super fan. I do not have I was not raised in Minnesota. I do have that strike against me. I was raised in upstate New York. But I got the chance for 5 years to work for Senator Al Franken. Yeah. And so I spent time in the cities. I spent time in Northfield, in your district, Mark. We were sent to Duluth in February, which I think was a form of hazing. I was sent to the Minnesota State Fair. The closest I've come to injuring myself by eating was at the Minnesota State Fair. But I completely fell in love with your state. And I have the way people looked out for each other, took care of each other. I think we just saw it with what happened with ICE in the cities. And it's something I saw every day from 2009 to 2014. So really quickly about the work I did. And actually, we'd like to do this a little different than probably a lot of these events. I don't want to spend all my time just talking at you. My hope is to share with you a little bit about what the Federal Trade Commission did when I was there as a commissioner, tell you a little bit about the areas we covered, and then we would love for you to drop in the chat what you would like to talk about in broadly speaking these areas. I am also someone who's lived in Washington, D.C. for, it pains me to say it, 19 years in the area. I don't live in D.C. I haven't lived there for maybe 7, 8 years, but in the broader area. And so served on the Senate Judiciary Committee with Senator Franken. So sadly, I'm pretty familiar with a lot of these characters and processes down here. So I can speak to all of those things. So real quick, the Federal Trade Commission protects people against fraud and anti-competitive actions. So what does that mean? It means we block what would have been the biggest grocery store merger between Kroger and Albertsons. And each of those massive grocery conglomerates has banners that you will recognize in your state. We prevented that from happening. We banned Martin Shkreli. You may remember that guy from participating in the pharmaceutical industry for life. He would buy an orphan drug, jack up the price sky high, and then watch the money roll in. We banned that guy from the pharma industry for life. We would step in when there was a company trying to corner the market on a new cancer medicine. We sued Amazon after they tried to rip off small business sellers by charging them up to 50 cents on every dollar that a mom and pop business would make on that site. We sued, some of you are in rural parts of the state. We sued John Deere for locking down their tractors and combines, making it impossible for the men and women who actually own those tractors and combines to fix their own tractors and combines by themselves or at their independent dealer down the street. We sued them for that. We sued Corteva and Syngenta. These are two name brand crop control manufacturers that we alleged were basically pushing off generic manufacturers off of key distribution chains. And so, I could go through all these lists of the kind of things we did, but we focused on your food, your health, your job. We sued DoorDash. We sued Lyft. We sued Care.com, Angie, for basically lying to people who are working on those sites about maybe how much money they would make, how many jobs were available. We got millions and millions of dollars back for consumers and regular working people and small business owners in this way. So those are the areas I worked in. Also, we set up our first team to assess some of the harms coming from social media, hired our first pediatrician. Unfortunately, we did not have Krish. We made a mistake. We hired someone else who was okay, did an okay job. Hired a first psychologist on staff, a technologist on staff. And so these are the kinds of things that we did. So would love to hear from folks. I'm going to try to pan over to the chat if I can to see if there's anyone who has dropped in anything they want to hear about. But I am having a, oh, here we go. It says the one that says chat. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Does anyone want to just raise their hands, unmute, tell us, ask, can you talk about clean water? Okay. Let me think about what I can talk about there. Water protections. Okay. So the Federal Trade Commission did not do too much around anything really around environmental protections. What I can tell you, however, that what's happening across every single field at the federal level is that corporate interests are effectively capturing the regulatory process. So one of the things that happened when I was at the FTC is that people from DOJ would come in. And once they were in, they would somewhat coincidentally start chopping off the programs that would be going against donors of the president. So this happened all across the CFPB, where all these powerful banks had these cases dropped against them, and it would turn out the executives from those companies would have just donated to the president. In our case at the FTC, we had a situation where an oil executive we alleged was attempting to collude with other oil producers. And the day after we barred him from the board of, or not the day, the week after we barred him from the board of ExxonMobil, there was a merger. Let's just say within the month, his son maxed out to the Republican National Committee and maxed out to the campaign to reelect the president. And immediately after there was a switch, this gentleman the order banning him from that board was undone, and he was allowed to rejoin the board. And again, this was after all these big donations. And so I can't speak with specificity about what's happened at the EPA, but I'm pretty confident it's some version of that. And so our environmental protections are suffering as a result of these processes also. I don't know if Krish or Mark, you want to jump in as I check out the chat. Warner Brothers Paramount, meddling by president, which matter. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Go ahead.
No, Alvaro, I was going to ask water. Something that we're hearing in SD49 a lot is concerns about data centers, about the power of our AI companies, the way they're dictating policy, environmental policy, energy policy, at both the federal and the state level. That affects water because of its utilization. Yes. It affects water because of just the ramifications on how much they use and the concerns. So I don't know if you have any experience.
I can with absolutely
data centers or AI.
Yeah. So we did not do too much on data centers when we were in. That wasn't our area of authority. FERC has some of that authority, but let me tell you that at the state and local level, there is a lot you can do. And having people in the legislature who are putting pressure on utilities commissions is extremely important. So a few quick things on data centers. First of all, only about 30% are municipally or locally owned or run. The rest are basically investor-backed utilities. And what you see across the board is that the municipal utilities boards and utilities providers, so it could be water, it could be electricity, et cetera, they see much lower increases in the utility rates, okay? What you're seeing now, however, is a data center will move in, and just to put this in context, they might take the equivalent of a medium-sized city's worth of demand on electricity, let's say. Could be, I know the stats for electricity a little better than I do water, but I know water is very comparable because all these things need to be cooled. And they will basically just add that to the demand. And so prices start rocketing up. Now, there's a couple things you can do short-term and long-term. Okay, long-term, in my point of view, from my point of view, you want a municipally run, locally run a set of utilities that are not backed by investors, that are not backed by private equity. But in the short term, what can you do to protect yourselves from these data centers and the demands they place upon your grid and, most importantly, your bill? We got an insane bill here in Maryland last month. I got a bill for $1,250. Like my neighbor got a bill for $900, so it's not like we're doing anything crazy in our house. And we don't have, this is like the biggest space in the house. This is our basement, so this is not a fancy house. We got a bill for $1,250 for electricity alone. So number one thing you can do is just bar them from entering anywhere near you, right? You know, usually they need to come get approvals for the construction of the data center from various bodies. Could be the utility commission, could be the city council, could be the town council, could be the state legislature in certain circumstances. One thing you can do is block them. That is the most visible thing you can do. And by the way, you can draw on different threads, right? Because it's not just you as regular people who are getting screwed over. It's also business owners. If you own a small retailer, right? If you own a mom and pop shop, right? You are going to be affected. If you're a farmer, you're going to be affected, right? So there are great coalitions that can be built there. There's other things, however, that you need to be aware of. You as a regular human being don't typically pay the same rate as the data center or as an industrial facility. And one of the simplest things that can be done is to move to a rule where everyone pays the same rate. And you might think that the consumer pays the lower rate than the industrial center or the data center, but typically it's the opposite. Usually consumers pay rates that are twice as higher as the industrial centers and significantly higher than the data centers. And so something simple that can be done is say, no, we're moving to a non-discriminatory rate across all payers. And as a result, yes, the industrial centers and certainly the data centers are going to pay more, and you will pay less. Okay. Just in case you need something extra to get you mad, if you're in that 70% block, the utilities can pass on to you lobbying expenses, private jet trips. And so you have every single reason to get mad. Here's the last thing, is that utilities commissions are these secret sources of power that for way too long, it's just been a revolving door where you go, you'll be on there, and then you get a sweet job working for the utilities used to regulate. And so having strong people who are focused on the little guy in those seats is really important. And then having strong legislators who can hold those utilities' feet to the fire is something really important. I have a friend in my hometown in Binghamton, New York. He's now the congressman there. His name is Josh Riley. He is literally in court against the utility. And now you might say, that's a little weird. Isn't he supposed to be in Congress? Well, he's in the minority, right? So he's not winning any votes, but he's in court taking the utility to task and trying to block these rate increases. Another thing to get you mad, look, I'm not jingoistic. I'm an immigrant myself, but some of these are foreign-owned utilities, right? Some of these are actually owned by investors abroad, and then some of them are owned by private equity, and some of them are owned by foreign private equity groups. And so, and the way private equity works is any place you see private equity entering your life, you see degradation in the services being offered to you. You start getting nickel and dime. And I see you, Elizabeth, because I live this every day. It sounds like you do too, right? Like you get that little bill, for something you didn't expect. Suddenly this thing you used to buy outright becomes a service you pay for every month, right? And so all of these are things that you can do to push back against the ingress of these data centers. Okay, that is terrible news. Sarah Fry just shared private equity just bought a Minnesota utility company. So another thing you can do, by the way, is go to your attorney general, who's terrific, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and start calling these things out and saying, hey, and so once we get Krish and Mark in, Krish and Mark can demand to hold hearings about, where you haul in these utilities and you take them to task for what they're doing. They could intervene in some of these processes to set the rates before these utilities commissions. You as a regular citizen usually have a right, but they also have a right. Let me refresh the chat and give my colleagues here a chance to jump in.
No, Alvaro, Thank you so much for expounding on that, the issues with data centers and just so important in our state right now. There's a couple questions there about
Let's
the
see.
work you did in the Biden administration.
Yeah.
So would love your
Paramount.
reflections
Yeah,
on that. Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, I see two questions. I'm going to read them out loud and then pivot over because for some reason my chat doesn't show up when I'm looking at everyone's shining faces. So there's a question from Elizabeth who shared. Okay, so Jacob asked, with the Warner Brothers Paramount merger, we're seeing unprecedented meddling by the president. What should be an independent matter handled solely by the FTC? Is there any way we can bar a president from getting this involved in mergers, especially for personal gain? Excellent question. I have ideas. Given the money in politics and concentration of power and money in the White House, the fact that you were fired, what can be done to really enforce Robinson-Patman or other ways to break up or challenge consolidation? What about mergers like the one that the Ellisons are doing, Paramount taking over Warner and so many media companies? And then Jen asked, I think that many of our problems can be laid at the feet of our weak antitrust laws. What are we doing to get public opinion strongly behind supporting strong antitrust laws? Okay, so question about keeping a president getting this involved, and then what can be done to really enforce Robinson-Patman or other ways to challenge consolidation? What about mergers like the one that the Ellisons are doing with Paramount taking over Paramount? Okay, so let me talk about Paramount and presidential meddling, and then let me talk about state power and what you all can do and what having Krish and Mark in office is going to help you do. And then let me talk about the antitrust laws in general and weak antitrust laws, because there's, again, stuff you can do at the state level. This isn't just a federal conversation. So let's talk about Paramount Warner Brothers. And not everyone may have been following this closely. So let me take you through the kind of parade of terribles here, parade of horribles. So historically, you may remember a few instances where like Bill Clinton, got on a plane at the same time as the then Attorney General. I forget her name. I forget whether it was Reno or someone else. And it was a scandal. It was front page news that Bill Clinton just got on a plane with the Attorney General and spoke to her. Okay? So just hold that thought for a second. Meanwhile, our media ecosystem used to be controlled by somewhere between 40 and 50 companies. Now they've gobbled each other up. We now have basically 5. And depending on the market you look at, this merger proposed between Paramount Skydance and Warner Brothers Discovery looks terrible. Okay, it looks terrible because a very large streamer is buying another large streamer. It looks terrible because there's 5 big movie studios and 2 of the biggest in terms of making actual movies that we can actually go to the movie theater and watch, with our wife, with our husband, with our kids, right? Those are going to get gobbled up, right? There are labor markets. Like you might think of Hollywood and think, oh, these are a bunch of rich people. No, yeah, there's the Brad Pitts, and Angelina Jolie's of the world or whatever. But most people who work in Hollywood are regular people. And most people employed in the entertainment industry are regular people. They might work as caterers. They might work as teamsters, doing driving of products between the shoots, they may be makeup artists. They may be extras, background artists. They may work on set, wrangling the kids or teaching the kids, tutoring the kids. There are a range of totally middle-class, normal jobs that these companies hire people for. And all those jobs are going to start getting consolidated and going away. And the biggest red flag on this is that when Paramount bought Skydance, that's the first thing that they just laid off tons and tons of people, right? So you want this merger to be reviewed by a Department of Justice that is just looking at the facts, just looking at the companies gobbling each other up and seeing, is this going to decrease the quality of the products? Is this going to increase the cost to consumers? Is this going to lower wages? But instead, what happened immediately early on is that Donald Trump said at an event at the Kennedy Center, I'm going to be very involved in this merger or something like that, right? And he kept on saying, I'm going to be the one who decides, right? So what happened is that the Ellison family started competing not on the basis of who can offer more money to the Warner Brothers board. They started competing through censorship. Okay? So what do they start doing? immediately after the bid is announced, David Ellison, father, calls up the White House and starts naming the individual CNN anchors, because CNN is part of Warner Brothers Discovery along with HBO, and query, do you think it's a good idea for one family to own CBS, as in CBS Evening News, 60 Minutes, which is a part of CBS, TikTok, which the Ellisons have a controlling stake in, and CNN and HBO, right? CNN, which, sometimes is conservative, sometimes is liberal, right? HBO, which has folks like John Oliver, right? Which has folks, which also has some CNN content, etc. So is that a good idea? Anyways, so David Ellison calls up and starts literally saying, hey, we can get Aaron Burnett off the air. Literally, this is what he tells the White House. We can get this other person off the air, etc. So then 60 Minutes messes up, right? 60 Minutes does journalism, and they run a interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene, whose politics have become all sorts of interesting recently, right? And so Donald Trump doesn't like that. And so Donald Trump blows up on Truth Social the day afterwards. And then right that same day, Ellison's son, I forget his name, whatever his name is, that guy, then he calls the White House and lets it be known that there will be a full overhaul of CNN. He tries to sweeten the pot more, right? What else happens? Okay. James Tallarico is about to go on air for Stephen Colbert, right? And Stephen Colbert is part of CBS. And what happens to Colbert is that he is given another thing that happens before then is there is an investigation into CCOT that 60 Minutes is about to run. And last minute, Bari Weiss, the censor at Paramount CBS, pulls that down. Eventually, it runs several weeks later, right? But then Tallarico is about to go on air. Tallarico has been very critical of the president, and the network tells him, no, you can't do that. The network tries to say, oh, we wanted equal time, etc. No, that's not what was happening. They took Tallarico down for those reasons, and so this is right. That happens right when Warner Brothers opened up a new window for Paramount to bid, because Netflix was in the lead in the money race. Paramount was competing on the Donald Trump censorship race, okay? But Warner Brothers finally said, okay, you can make another bid. And that is when not only did they increase their bid, their money bid, they increased their censorship bid. Okay, so you might be asking the question from Jacob, Mr. Olson, was, hey, how can we keep Donald Trump from getting involved in these mergers? The answer right now is we cannot. Okay, we have no way of doing that. Now, if Krish and Mark, along with a wave of federal office holders, are swept in, and Democrats, retake Congress, and we put folks in that have spines, right? What can they do? We strengthen something called the Tunney Act, which is a law passed after Richard Nixon was playing fast and loose with antitrust law, and make it even harder for the president to meddle. Okay. I have a crazy idea, which is the money for the Department of Justice and the money for FTC should actually be freely distributed to the states when it comes to antitrust, so to strengthen the hands of people like Keith Ellison. But the most important thing I would say is for your states to provide increased support and funding for people like Keith Ellison, because this brings me to the second question of what more can we do on antitrust? Because everyone keeps on looking to the feds. I have news. Okay. Robinson Patman, someone asked Robinson Patman, which is my favorite word. Basically, I'm sure some of you, especially in Mark's district, I think live in rural areas. My wife is from Louisiana. I grew up in a pretty suburban area, but through visiting my wife's family, I got to know that a lot of parts of rural Louisiana, the sum total of your healthcare infrastructure, not just part of it, right, is your independent pharmacy. They're the last ones to close before a hurricane. They're the first ones to open after a hurricane. And similarly, you have a similar dynamic with rural grocery and urban grocery and urban pharmacy, okay? The areas that the big chains don't consider it profitable to serve, whether you're a big box store or a big chain pharmacy, where there's working class people in urban America and rural America, those tend to be independents, Okay, those are the small businesses we know and love. Those are the places you walk in. There's jerseys from the local teams up. There's little fundraisers for local causes up. There's an owner who knows the names of the people who walk in their front door, right? All those local groceries, rural, urban, those local pharmacies, rural, urban, the independents used to get a level playing field thanks to something called the Robinson-Patman Act, which basically said, hey, back then it was the A&P, now it's Walmart. Hey, A&P, hey, Walmart, you can't cut secret deals with your suppliers that jack your competitors' prices up and jack your prices down, okay? There needs to be a level playing field. Then came this guy named Robert Bork and the Reagan Revolution. It's not just on Republicans, though. It's also on Democrats, because Democrats took that stuff hook, line, and sinker. And they also stopped paying attention to antitrust enforcement, aggressive antitrust enforcement, and they stopped enforcing this law. So why am I talking about this federal stuff when I just said, oh, you guys at the state level? Guys, every single state has or can have a Robinson-Patman law on the books. To the third question, every single state has antitrust laws in their books that they can strengthen. California is on the cusp of passing one of the strongest antitrust laws on the books, anti-monopoly laws on the books. And I know that folks at the Farmers Union have been working to further strengthen the laws we have, the antitrust law as an enforcement we have at the state level in Minnesota. And so these are all things you can ask of our future legislators, Mark and Krish, right, to try to get assigned to the committees that govern antitrust law. And either way, demand strong antitrust enforcement. Try to fund up Keith Ellison as much as you can, because Keith, he's an amazing guy, right? I love that guy. He does not have nearly the resources he needs to take on the Cortevas and Syngentas of the world, the John Deeres of the world. He tries, and he sues a lot of these guys too, right? A lot of these monopolists we're talking about. But we need them to have strong support. Okay, got a question from Godon. Isn't part of the problem is that our system of power structure, legislative, executive, legal systems is not functioning as we expect? Can you address how to improve oversight of our capitalistic system? Excellent. And this brings me to the strong antitrust laws point as well. So let me go to Godon's point and then kind of back into the penultimate question. So here is my best explanation for this, by the way. And by the way, continued thanks to Bill and Mary, Bruce, Elizabeth, Kathleen, Randy, for lending us your presence here. That is awesome. I really appreciate it. Krish and Mark are very good-looking people, but you know, I like seeing like seeing other folks. Thank you, Sarah. So here's my analysis, and I think everyone needs to have their own analysis as to why our government. Thanks, Michelle. Our government is kind of especially broken. I think that the vast majority of our federal infrastructure, certainly the vast majority of our federal infrastructure, was built at a time when the greatest threat was from government, okay? Hence, the Bill of Rights being all a series of guarantees against government overreach. Fun fact, Thomas Jefferson wanted an amendment in there about fighting monopolies. Didn't get it, okay? And at that time, that probably made sense. Most power was held in the hands of the government, which was also, you know, the moneyed class, right? The people who had money were kings and queens and noblemen, right? And they held the government, and they were the primary source of government overreach. Now, another fun fact, the Boston Tea Party was a protest against the monopoly given to the East India Company over tea, right? And one of our source of the Fourth Amendment was against government inspectors who demanded to be let into people's houses to see if they were charging the right taxes on that tea. If people had brought in contraband tea from somewhere else, right? So that, like, we owe the Fourth Amendment in part to the aggressiveness that that the British government was using to enforce to basically enforce the right of the monopoly to dominate that stream of trade, right? But let me step back, okay? Now, the fact that our government, and I would say also our civil society, is primarily oriented to checking government power, you can also see that in our civil society. That's what the other point I was getting at. And let me tell you what I mean. So if I lose my job, I was fired illegally, okay? So that's my contention. 2, 3, 4, 5 different nonprofits at Alvaro. Do you want to be represented by us for free? If I get deported illegally, we still have a lot more to do to support amazing organizations like the Immigrant Law Center in the cities, right? My old friend John Keller used to run it. Now I think he works for Keith Ellison. Could be wrong about that. But we do need to fund up more of these nonprofits. But still, there are nonprofits who will step up and say, I will represent you for free. If you are a farmer and John Deere locks your tractor, right? If they, if basically there's a tight control over fertilizer as well. What my farmer friends in Iowa always say, and the folks said at the Farmers Union convention this year, is anytime I see a little extra profit, the fertilizer prices, they pop right up and they eat up that profit out from under me. Why is that? Because there's only so many places you can get your fertilizer, right? I think there's like 3 suppliers nowadays. And yet, unlike China, by the way, this is a separate point. We don't have a strategic fertilizer reserve, right? Probably should do that kind of thing, right? Anyways, so if you're a mom and pop grocery and Walmart cuts secret deals with your suppliers that screw you, if you are injured on the floor of an Amazon warehouse, in other words, if you're an independent family farmer, if you're a small business owner, or if you are a regular working person who's injured by one of these billionaires, we basically don't have nonprofits who will step up and fight for you for free. Either the government steps in, and nowadays Donald Trump's federal agencies aren't really going out there and helping the little guy. They're in there for the oligarchs, or your case is worth like $100 million. So all this is, and some big fancy plaintiff's lawyer will step in and represent you. All this is a way of saying our government and our civil society are all about checking government overreach. They are not about checking oligarchic overreach. They're not about checking oligarchy. And so if I could describe the monumental task that Krish and Mark are going to have, what I would say is our generational challenge is focusing less on left and right and focusing a lot more on the money at the top versus the independent family farmer, the small business owner, and the regular working person underneath, right? And making sure that our engines of government are checking that, right? Now, you might be saying, that's a nice problem, Alvaro. It sounds like a completely massive, unsolvable problem. And here's what I would say, which is, go down, Alvaro, what you're saying, imply, as I learned, is that we need to reimagine our government. A tall task. It is a tall task, but let me share it. So let's talk about why I think it is a doable task. Okay, 3 things. Number 1, who passed antitrust laws first? The federal government or the state government? The state government. It was actually your neighbors in Iowa, okay, who passed the nation's first antitrust law. I think it was like in 1887. Then Congress came in 1888 and passed the Interstate Commerce Commission, then the Sherman Act in 1890. But it was led by the Granger movement and then the Farmers Alliances system, right? And the populist movement of the 19th century, okay? So many of the things we have today, direct election of senators, my friends, that was brought to you by the populist movement, okay? Our nation's antitrust laws, the existence of the Sherman Act, right? The existence of the Clayton Antitrust Act, the existence of the Robinson-Patman Act. Those are due, like we used to not have these laws at all. Just think about that for a second. All our laws were about, were not about checking these massive trusts, right? You used to have the beef trust, the sugar trust, the beet trust. There was actually a beet trust. We did not have laws to check them. We did not have laws to break them up. And then over the course of roughly 50 years in the wave that followed the populist movement that crested in 1892, were all these laws that came out of that process, right? And I would say it's that tradition that eventually gave us the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for example, okay? And so, yes, it is a tall task, but it is not a new task, and it is a task that has begun in the States. And here's the last thing, let me tell you, which is, and I know we have a variety of politics in the chat, so to speak. Let me tell you my politics. I was a pretty traditional left versus right liberal, right? I was pretty convinced that everything Democrats said was right and everything Republicans said was wrong. That used to be what I thought. Then I went to work for the FTC, right? And then I got to go hang out with, a bunch of corn growers and cattlemen in Iowa, and independent grocers in South Dakota, and wholesalers in Salt Lake City, and labor unions in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, and shrimpers in the bayou, literally on the bayou, right? And what I saw is two things. First of all, and this is not about me, what I'm about to say. The moment I would walk in to meet with anyone, they'd say, thank God you're here. Thank God you're here. And this had nothing to do with anything about me, right? And I think in certain circumstances that they actually Googled me and my political beliefs, they'd be like, oh, this guy's kind of a lefty liberal. I don't know about this guy, right? No, it's that I was there with the toolkit of antitrust. I was there with the toolkit of the tools we have to check that concentrated corporate power. And I was there to listen to them, right? And as a result, this lefty liberal guy, this idea of states dismantling Citizens United, this is so I know a little bit about this idea. I'm going to get to it in a second. And now, one of my best friends in the world is a corn grower in Iowa. He's from the Mansky family. There's actually a legislator who's a conservative in the Minnesota legislature who's his cousin, but Josh is on the other side. So there's a guy named Josh Mansky, who's a corn grower and a farmer in Iowa, member of both the Iowa Farmers Union and the Minnesota Farmers Union. So yeah, that guy's one of my best friends in the world now, right? I'm friends with a pharmacist in West Virginia, in rural West Virginia, right? I'm friends with a guy who owns the one independent grocery in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, right? These are all now my personal friends. Why? Because I'm not engaging them in terms of this left and right spectrum, and more in terms of this bottom versus the top fight that I think is the most promising. There is a state strategy to overturn Citizens United. I think it has to do with the definition of corporations and state charters, but I really like to give people right information. And I know we probably have some Carleton and St. Olaf professors on, and I don't want to say wrong things. And so I'm going to not pretend I know everything, because I definitely don't know exactly. Can the Minnesota state push for better price for medicines to fight the pharma industry? Yes. So there's a couple things you can do that a guy like Keith Ellison can do, Mark and Krish can do once they're in, and a state auditor. I actually forgot. I used to know a lot more about the structure of Minnesota government. I forget whether you guys have an auditor or a comptroller. You do? Okay, excellent. So there's a couple things. I have a lot of focus on the pharmacy front, because that's where a lot of the folks who are most working class, lowest income, most isolated from other resources have, but there's other things you can do. So first of all, your auditors can audit the for-profit insurance services that are being contracted for by the state. Okay, and there is no auditor that has done this and has not become a hero in their state, that has actually done it right. Okay, look at Yost over in Ohio. I think Yost is now AG of Ohio. He started out as auditor, just ripped the insurers to shreds in his audit, ripped the PBMs to shreds in his audit. Did really well for himself. Republican, did great, right? This is not a left-right issue. This stuff about healthcare and farmer prices. Okay, that is one thing you can do. Some folks in Arkansas have done this amazing thing, which is in the courts. That's more of a radical thing, but I love it. It prevents a pharmacy middleman called a pharmacy benefit manager from owning pharmacies. So it breaks that connection. Now, that sounds like a super wonky thing. What the heck am I talking about? So we used to have lots of insurers. We used to have lots of pharmacies. We used to have lots of pharmaceutical companies. Now, especially the insurers and the pharmacies all kind of gobbled each other up. And there used to be these middlemen that would negotiate rates, good deals for the insurers against the manufacturers of the drugs. But now those have been gobbled up by the insurers as well. And so now what you have are these vertically integrated tranches of insurer, pharmacy, pharmacist. Now, you might be saying, hey, I like Trader Joe's and they're vertically integrated. What's wrong with vertical integration, right? What's wrong with having a dog in the pharmacy fight? And what happens, unfortunately, is that the big, massive conglomerates self-preference, okay? So they might jack up the prices that go to the pharmacies that they don't own so that their pharmacies are more attractive. The other thing they do, and I saw this in West Virginia, and it's tragic. A family walks into a pharmacy with a prescription for cancer medicine for their kid, and for cancer medicine for their kid. That is, oh, Justin, you're in the chat. What are you talking about? Why are you showing me your face? Justin Stoffrenan is in the group from the Minnesota Farmers Union. Has apparently just been quietly listening this whole time. Hey, Justin. Justin is an amazing guy, an antitrust warrior. So when Mark and Krish are in, they're going to be working hand in glove with this gentleman from the Minnesota Farmers Union to get us stronger antitrust enforcement, antitrust laws. And that is a great group. So anyways, there's a story where a family walks into a pharmacy with a prescription for cancer medicine, and the pharmacy says, I have the medicine right here, but I'm an independent. And your insurer is telling me you need to go home and wait for your kid's cancer medicine to arrive in the mail so that that insurer can get that great income from that high cost cancer medicine. Okay, so what the folks in Arkansas are saying, they're cutting the connection between the PBM and the pharmacy. They're requiring them to be independent. Okay, but like what Mark and Krish can do are invest or use their power as legislators to hold hearings, to investigate, to subpoena some of these companies and see what they're doing in terms of costs. Okay, and then work hand in glove with AG Ellison to make sure that what's something we saw that the state attorneys general can sue on. We saw a scenario where we alleged that these pharmacy middlemen were actually trying to compete to raise the price of insulin for a complicated set of reasons I won't explain. But that's something that an attorney general Ellison can come into. But to summarize, use the power of the state to audit the companies. Use the power, especially in their provision of services to the state. Okay, and so you have standing, in other words, to get in there. Get at these vertically integrated tranches of pharmacy middlemen that often screw over low-income people in rural and urban America. And then lastly, ensure strong antitrust enforcement by empowering folks like Keith Ellison with the resources they need to do this enforcement. And like when I say they don't have the resources they need, I mean they like a lot of them have like 2 people working on antitrust or 3 people working on antitrust. They should have the double of that. Let me pause there and just catch up with the chat here. Can the Minnesota state push? Okay, one of the big things the Biden administration did that Trump has taken credit for is lower drug prices that was negotiated before he was even elected. How do those negotiations look like? So we live in a very weird world where there is actually federal laws prohibiting the government using its purchasing power to go to these drug manufacturers, these pharma companies, and saying like, hey, you know, we're about to buy tons and tons and tons of this drug. You're going to give us a good price on it. For reasons that mostly involve lobbyists and other things, like President Biden was able to secure the authority to negotiate a certain set of drugs, and President Trump has continued that. And so how have those negotiations gone? My very rough understanding, and I will confess, kind of like the Citizens United Amendment, at the state fix, I have not followed these particular negotiations closely. My general sense, and we have a pediatrician in the chat, so he can probably speak to this. Speaking of Krish Subrahmanian, of course, but like my impression is that when the government can do these negotiations, they can actually extract a better price, and they can pass it on. But ideally, they should be able to do it on all medicines. But Krish, you should weigh in, and Mark, you should also. I've been talking way too much.
No, I think that's right, Alvaro. And obviously, the government now has a limited capacity to do it. I think it's made actually some fairly significant impact. But I think the Biden administration chartered that opportunity and made it happen. And listen, I would encourage it, and I'm glad to see it starting to happen. So.
And it's just another reason why, you know, we have a good argument on our side of the aisle. It's sometimes when government gets involved in things, they are really able to leverage the ability to make a positive impact and a good change. On the far right side of things, they constantly talk about how we need to deregulate and enable big business to make a ton of money so that it'll trickle down to folks. And the less regulation that they have on them, the more it seems that they crush the human beings and the spirit and the soul. So bringing in some of those good positive changes through government really is a good articulation of how positive government can intervene in people's lives.
let me also throw something out there for folks in ag. And I don't know if anyone on the chat is like a cattleman, but like you are affected by what's happening to cattlemen right now. And so everyone should care, which is that we are now weirdly in another place that we were kind of like the beef trust back when the antitrust laws were passed. The beef trust was a group of 4 meat packers in Chicago that were all kind of colluded to lower the price of for cattle that they bought from the cattlemen, and to jack up the price of beef to the consumers while they adulterated it. See The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. But we are again in a situation where there's 4 powerful meat packers, and there's a new strategy being adopted at the federal level that in theory could work at the state level, which is to try to demand breakups of these meat packers legislatively. And if you're wondering, like, why do I care about this? The reason you care about this is a couple. There's a bunch of these. So like, if you're like, what's happening right now is you're seeing high beef prices, but recently some cattlemen have been getting some higher prices. But in general, the cattlemen aren't seeing those high beef prices. Like, you probably want to be able to eat meat that is local to you, right? You probably want to be able to eat beef that was born, raised, processed in the United States. Like, I think a lot of people are willing to pay that premium. And by the way, when it says USDA inspected, that does not mean it was born, raised, and processed in the US. And so what happens is when a cattleman just has one place to process their cattle as opposed to 2 or 3, there's no price competition. So that Brazilian-owned JBS meat packer can pay them nothing, to basically pay them subsistence wages, right? And then jack up the price to the supermarket, right? To the downstream distributor, to the downstream seller. The other thing that happens is, like, during COVID, these meat processing plants will shut down. And suddenly these cattlemen have to euthanize their cattle. They have to euthanize their hogs. They have to basically kill the livestock they've raised because they have nowhere to take it. So what happens is we have a middleman capturing all this this upside that we want to be going to your independent family farmer, to your independent cattleman, to your independent rancher, right? So you're screwing local business. You're screwing the consumer because they're seeing the higher rate, and you're creating these really brittle supply chains that, heaven forbid, we have another COVID, means that our kids aren't eating beef, right? Because who knows what's going to happen in that instance. And we also, so we don't have the ability to have, we have really brittle supply chains. I've been talking a lot. Anyways,
Alvaro, maybe I see Elizabeth has one more question, if you don't mind addressing that. Absolutely. And then I might turn it over to Mark to close this out. Our time has flown.
If you can give a summary of shift from fairness to efficiency and enforcement. Yeah. So, okay. So, when I got nominated to the FTC, I didn't know anything about antitrust. And I was in law school, and I didn't take antitrust because it sounded really boring. And honest to goodness answer, that's literally why I did not take antitrust. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, I was like 24, so you got to cut me a little slack. When I got nominated, I'd worked for Senator Franken a little bit in trying to block the Comcast merger with NBC, the Comcast acquisition of NBC. But other than that, I hadn't learned anything. And so I started ordering books, and I started reading the legislative histories, and there were 2 totally different stories, okay? The modern books written by these very well-paid law professors, and by well-paid, I mean they make hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars, like $500,000, $600,000, $7,000, like $1 million, not just in their law professor salaries, but in all these consulting fees and in the textbooks that they print. And the name of the game there was that antitrust was all about efficiency. Okay, antitrust was all about graphs and marginal rate of return, and you really couldn't tell if there's an antitrust violation unless you hired a very high-powered economist. And antitrust wasn't about small business. No, like, oh, that's protectionist. Antitrust isn't about protecting that independent cattleman. It's not about protecting that independent family farmer. Antitrust actually is about protecting competition. And the only thing that matters in competition is lower prices to the consumer. Okay? even if those lower prices might be temporary until the monopoly is achieved, and then the prices go up, right? Even if, it means that people go out of work, even if it means that the small business owner doesn't have that level playing field and is basically competing uphill to the Walmarts. Like, I've talked to so many independent grocers, they'll tell you 30, 40 years ago, I could compete with the Grand Union. I could compete with insert name of big grocery store back then, but now I cannot. I simply cannot. I will actually go to Walmart and see products offered at a lower price for sale to the consumer than my wholesaler who bundles up all our orders can get. Okay, so that's what antitrust scholars, in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s thought. And this was the Chicago school, it was the Harvard school. My friends, it was Republicans and Democrats alike did it to us. Okay, and Bill Clinton did it to us and his enforcers. Okay, and Barack Obama did a little bit better, but not that better. And so this is a Republican and Democrat thing that they did to our farmers and our small business owners. Okay, that big business did. You go read the 1890 debates on the floor of the Senate and the House. Number one, people, and forgive my language, they are pissed. They are completely pissed. They are pissed at John Rockefeller. They are pissed at the Beef Trust. They are pissed that these oligarchs have gained control of the railroads so that if you're independent, you cannot possibly compete because you're charged through the roof. And what happens is they'll say, oh, so sorry, you're going out of business. You have two options. You can either join us or you can go out of business, in which case I might want to buy your business, right? That's what the John Rockefellers of the world would say to their competitors when it came to oil in that case, okay? And when you read the transcripts in 1890, 1914, 1936, 1950, over and over and over again, they say, we want fairness. We want fairness for the cattleman. We want fairness for the small grocer. We want fairness for the worker. That is what we want. And the great irony is, if you open up, they're called horn books. Those are the review books for law students, horn books, where you boil everything down, okay? Literally, the word efficiency is everywhere. Efficiency, like the purpose of antitrust, to have efficient outcomes. My friends, I swear to you, you read the entirety of American antitrust statutes, the word efficiency does not appear once. It does not appear once. What does appear, however, is a prohibition against unfair competition and unfair and deceptive trade practices. You have protections against fairness. And so I think the reason that Krish and Mark asked me to join, in addition to me and Krish being buddies from way back when, and me being a super fan of Minnesota, is that when I was in with someone named Lena Khan, who was the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, who was my colleague, right? I was serving alongside someone named Jonathan Canner, someone named Joe Dohameki. And obviously we're just the figureheads, right? We're the people who get yelled at or do the yelling or are in the headlines. It was our staffs and the career staff underneath us where we started turning the aircraft carrier away from this lodestar of efficiency and towards this lodestar of fairness and towards a lodestar where small business needs to be listened to. You need to take care of the independent family farmer. You need to care about the labor union. Those folks matter more than the Chamber of Commerce. So that was how we started turning the aircraft carrier. I think I've gone a little long, so let me shut up and pass it over to you, Mark.
Thanks. And, just speaking for everybody that I'm looking at on my screen here, I honestly think we could probably sit here for another 3 hours and listen to you talk, because this has been so enlightening. And just for the sake of audience and showing our appreciation, if everybody could please face their camera and give a good round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I honestly, Krish and I are running to make a better Minnesota, and every single race matters, whether it's in my Senate district or in Krish's where he's running. And you said something so enlightening today, and that's the greatest threat used to be the government. We were concerned about the government and the overreach in our lives. And while we've certainly seen that in Minnesota, right now, we're seeing the threat that big business in control of government is. And if there's one thing that Minnesotans cannot stand, it is a lack of fairness in the policies that we have. and we need that protection. And just sitting here listening to you tonight, I now have a new list of things to do in the first 2 weeks of
That's
my
right.
term in the Senate, and Krish will be a good ally in that. For everybody here, Krish is in a battle up there running against, what is it, four other folks for the nomination on the Democratic side. And, he needs a heck of a lot of support, and he's doing a fantastic job. He will
Amen.
be a wonderful colleague as I continue running down here in SD 58. Learning together is what makes Minnesota a wonderful place because we all have a thirst to learn. And Alvaro, please accept our thanks again for
Thank
joining
you.
us tonight.
Thank you for having me. And I'd be remiss if you want more rants about this stuff. I have a fun little podcast called The Fair Fight with Alvaro and Max. It is on Spotify, Apple, everywhere you get podcasts. The Fair Fight with Alvaro and Max, and you'll hear a lot more about this stuff. But most importantly, Krish and Mark, I hope you drop your. Well, I guess if folks got here, they got in touch with you, but I certainly will be doing everything I can to support Krish and Mark. My hope is to make it out to you guys in person at some point later this year to support and have a longer conversation. But so grateful for your leadership, Mark. So grateful for your leadership, Krish, for both of your service. And I hope that you are elected very soon, and then we can start putting some of this stuff in action.
We agree. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alvaro. Have a great night. Be well, everyone. Thank you.